We're just about 6 games from the halfway point of Winnipeg's season, and you know what? It's about time that we have a bit of a mid-season progress report. How are the Jets forwards doing? How's the back end doing? And what should we think of the coaching staff? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at @JLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are doing we do this sometimes about a mid-season progress report. I'm doing it a little bit earlier this season just because 6 games to me isn't going to make that big of a difference. And you know what? I feel like we have a reasonable enough sample size to give you at least some early preliminary thoughts. Now, I'm going to do the grading not necessarily by individual players, but more like player groupings, right? We're going to do like generally the most common lines. Some of these pairings and lines obviously have changed on and off throughout the season, but we have a fairly consistent cast that I think we can at least award some sort of a letter grade to. And because it's a group project, I think it's important to kind of talk about the cumulative rather than individual players. But we will give those shout outs where appropriate. But before we dive into all of that, just wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, kicking us off, we're going to start with the forwards. And this is probably one of the more interesting groups. You know, you've got a whole range of letter grades that I'm going to host or to assign, but like starting off with the first line, Connor Scheifele and Vilardi. This line for me, I feel like I'm going to give a B- to. And it does feel a little bit strange when you're talking about having a line where 2 guys are in the 40-point range. Connor is almost up to 50 points, and Scheifele's, at 42, which is well over a point per game. Vilardi's the only guy on this line who's actually under a point per game, which is a little bit funny. But I think, when you look at who is currently leading the way on this team, it's not super shocking that Connor and Scheifele are among the top scorers. Now, the reason that it's not necessarily an A for this line is because, in my mind, the top line, and it's kind of what's been true of this unit over the last several years, is that against most bad teams, this trio absolutely shines. And it's kind of why you often see coaching staffs, I think, turn to them, right? The thought process behind this line makes a ton of sense. You've got your top scorer and finisher. You've got Scheifele, who's basically a jack of all trades. And you've got Vilardi, who's a net front, down low beast along the walls, too. So in theory, it really should work well. But we know that defensively, it's kind of been a little bit of a bit of a mixed bag. And in terms of, the general offensive play at 5v5, it's kind of been very 50-50. That's sort of the vibe that I get with this group. I will say it's better than last year's sample. I think, you're going to have more on nights from this trio than off nights like there were last year, but it's still, compared to other top lines around the league, kind of a little mediocre, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't finish opportunities, and finish they have, and that's been especially apparent on the power play. These guys together on the first unit are just completely video game level. I mean, there's no question that, they've been completely sensational when they have a man advantage. It's just, it's not even a question. They've been so freaking good that it's actually a little frightening. But I think it's also worth giving Kyle Connor his particular roses this year. He's been a completely different player, and he's playing the best hockey of his career. So I feel like if I was to give the line like a B- as a whole, he gets an easy A. He's been every complaint that I've really ever had about his game has completely been ironed out for the most part. Defensively, still a little questionable, but the rest of Kyle Connor's game has been top line through and through, to the point where you just don't even care about the other stuff. He's giving you so much in transition and in creation and scoring and offensive creativity that it's been really no question. And now I kind of wonder, what you do with his contract extension. I feel like that's a lot harder to think about than I was expecting. If it was last year or the previous year's Connor, I'd be a little more mixed. But now I kind of feel like, it wouldn't be the worst to bring him back, to put it lightly. Not that I really expected the team not to re-sign him. I think they will, but he is also going to be looking for a pretty significant raise, and that one could hurt. Now, the so-called second line, which is really not the second line, but we're going to use it for all intents and purposes, is Ehlers, Nemesnikov, and Perfetti. And I'm going to give this line like gosh, this is a hard one. I'm kind of leaning to like B minus, C plus, which maybe makes the top line more like a B. Actually, you know what? We'll keep B minus for the top line. I think the second line's probably like a C plus. And it's not that they haven't been great at times. There have been moments where they'll definitely drive offense and, they can make some great stellar defensive reads, a la Cole Perfetti, who's really taken a step forward this year. But I really feel like Nemesnikov is really slowing down. Ehlers has kind of been up and down this year. And I know that he's been dealing with an injury too. So I'll keep that in mind. And he's always been very honest about his own performance. But all that said, about a third of the way through the season, almost the halfway point, I'm just not loving this trio. And I think it's a mishmash of skills, right? I think it's not really the right chemistry. It's not the right combination of skill sets. And Nemesnikov is being asked to do more than I think he's really capable of right now. You're wanting 2C level play from him, and he's more like a 4C, right? I was still kind of hoping that maybe he'd be able to repeat last year's performance. Hasn't really been the case. And so for that reason, I think this line has kind of struggled as a whole in some key areas, but they're not bad enough to where it's getting into the D rank. But I feel like, I'm on a really borderline C plus B minus. I think that's kind of where I'm at with them. So I think that there's room for growth, and if they get a different center at the trade deadline, my ranking probably changes considerably. Third line, which is really the true second line, but you get the vibes. I'm going to give this group, Lowry, Niederreiter, and Appleton, I'd say a B plus, and it's a B plus because recently their performance has definitely taken a bit of a hit, and I'm not really sure it's their fault. I just think the Jets have really asked them to be, one of your really big matchup groups, and it's been very hard for them to sustain that for the entire season when, maybe the top six hasn't been scoring as much. At times, they've really tried to carry the Jets offense, and I feel like that's probably not what you want them to do. I think that they should be used as like a brutalizing force against opposing depth units, but I don't think that they should have to lead the way offensively. But all that said, I think that they've done about as much as could possibly be expected. I feel like B plus is probably appropriate to account for the recent dip in form. But I mean, realistically, like they've done pretty much whatever the Jets have really asked of them, sometimes a little too much. And maybe that's really on the coaching staff and some of the Jets lineup questions that is more of a concern than anything that they're doing. So overall, I think that they've had a very good season. And I feel like B plus is probably maybe slightly underselling their best level of play. But obviously we have room for growth in the grades later this season. Fourth line, it's just like a B or B minus or like a C plus. I mean, they've been fine in terms of the forechecking and stuff. I think the lack of offense from Iafallo and Kupari and Gustafsson, sometimes, Barron, who's kind of really dropped off this year, I think that's a bit of a concern. They're fine. Like Iafallo, I think has probably been the best of those three, and he's been good. With Kupari, I feel like Rasmus is just fast, and that's helped a bit, and his game has improved. But I feel like I still could use more out of this fourth line. Again, the forechecking and defensive work is fine, but if I have to take like a full holistic inventory of what they've done, it's just. I don't know. Maybe C plus seems a little bit harsh, but I feel like they've just been okay. They eat the matchups. They generally forecheck and don't concede a ton, but they're also not giving you a lot the other way either. So, yeah, I feel like there's some room for improvement there, and maybe a guy like Jibrikov could be a piece that helps in the long run. But curious to know what your ratings would be. What would you give your letter grades for the forward groupings? Drop those in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. We also have to talk about the defense, the goaltending, and the coaching in just a moment. But before we dive into our report cards for those, did want to tell you about our friends and partners at PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks because this holiday season, they're also giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. When your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as quickly as 15 minutes. This coming weekend, I would eye the board for choices like Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele over four shots on goal together. Probably, 2 assists, I would say, more than for each of those guys. Same for Morrissey, heading into next week. I think it's a pretty safe lineup choice to have those 3. I mean, they've really been putting out recently, so hard to really say that they shouldn't be in your lineup, right? These guys are producing consistently, goals, assists, shots on goal, whatever it is that you're going for. I would say you're going to get more than whatever you think they're going to do. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about the Jets midseason report cards. We talked about the forward groupings. Let's talk about the back end. And the back end is a little more complicated. So the top pairing, Morrissey and DeMello, this is a hard one. I would say it's a C+. And I think it's more from individual performances kind of dragging this pairing down than anything. You already know who I'm already referring to. This one hurts me personally, but Dylan DeMello has been very bad this year. This has been like the worst sustained stretch of play from him that I've ever seen. And it's not like it's really showing on the score sheet. If you just looked at his plus or minus, which is not a stat that I use, but a lot of people still kind of refer to it. He's a plus 15, and so you would kind of look at that and say, how on earth is he doing poorly? But if you actually watch his defensive reads, his gapping, the penalties that he's taking, and the general lack of foot speed and the ability to sort of pivot and turn quickly, it's been a really, really tough year for Dylan. He can still make good poke checks and stuff, but I feel like something in his game has fundamentally changed. And I don't know if it's aging. I don't know if he's injured. Whatever it is, DeMello has really not been the same reliable top 4 guy that we've seen the past several years. This version of him has just been very bad. And it's been like career worst for his Jets tenure. And it's lasting a lot longer than I expected. So it's really disconcerting. He's been with us for the better part of like 4.5 years now. And it's just to see him kind of fall off like this, it is inevitable, right? Guys do slow down, but we've seen plenty of veteran age defenders do really well. And so DeMello falling off like this right at the start of a new contract is really not ideal. I'm hoping that it's more like health related and that it's just an injury that he's nursing and that he comes back and that he's able to turn things around. But I will admit I do have some skepticism. Morrissey, that has definitely had an impact on his game. I feel like he's more tentative than he's been in the past. Right now, the score sheet looks very good for him because he's almost a point per game. I think a lot of that is coming off of the power play too, and just the fact that he continues to still activate pretty aggressively. But when it comes to his actual defensive impacts and stuff, last year was really, really good. This year has kind of been a step back. And again, I think it's partly because DeMello is struggling and Morrissey has kind of struggled to try and match that. So I don't know that it's necessarily him. I think if you gave Morrissey a different partner, this pairing probably moves into like the B+ to A- or A tiers. So again, I think this one is really where the individual performances kind of stand out. This probably also extends to the second pairing. I'm going to go with Samberg and Pionk. I feel like that's the predominant pairing that we're going to see. And, it would be the normal pairing had we not had Samberg miss like a month and a half. If it was Fleury Pionk and that's the pairing that you had, it'd be like a C- to D+. That pairing is very, very bad. But Samberg Pionk is like A- tier. That duo has been incredible on the ice. Pionk is allowed to offensively activate at a level and in a way that we really haven't seen before from him. He's very much been not the same player since Sandberg's gone down. And I think it's really telling of just how important Sandberg is to this defense that at the time that he went down, a lot of the Jets 5v5 play also sort of cascaded. His departure, which really kept this Jets core together, I don't want to say one player is that important to the team, but I think in his particular case, it kind of caused a domino effect in the puck moving ability, in the defensive structure, the PK, all this stuff. It really did have a pretty profound impact, and it especially had an impact on Pionk, who, for better or worse, is one of the most relied upon defenders on this team. And so for him not to be able to activate as much, to struggle defensively, and not have that anchor in Sandberg really hurt that pairings rating when they're apart. But I'm going to give this grade based on Sandberg Pionk because I feel like that's just more fair. And in that respect, again, because those guys have been so good, I'm giving them an A-. Again, some blemishes here and there. Pionk still has Pionk moments when, he's alongside Sandberg, but it's been much less than usual. Third pairing, gosh, I mean, it's been such a rotating cast, but I would say Fleury Miller's probably the pairing that you would normally expect. We've also seen a fair dose of Stanley, and so because of that, I do have a hard time with this one. I'm going to give this one like a C+. Because we've seen a fair bit of Stanley, and Miller's been benched fairly frequently, it's made the third pairing kind of a mess. I don't know what we're going to see when everyone's healthy. My hope would be, some combination of Heinola Miller or Fleury Miller. Either of those is fairly acceptable, but I would also expect to see Stanley come back in, which is naturally going to hurt that rating. I don't want to point fingers at specific players, but we all kind of understand that Stanley at this point is not a top 6 defender. He's like a 7th or 8th. And when he's on the ice, it's usually not great for the Jets. So with that in mind, yeah, I'm going to give that pairing like a C+. I feel like when we have like Fleury Miller or Heinola Miller, it's been good, but we don't have that all that often or as much as I'd like it to be. And so for that reason, it's really hard for me to give them a higher rating than the C ranking. But yeah, I wish I could give them more recognition, but I think we sort of know why I'm hesitant to do so. Now, as much as the defense has maybe had a bit of a mixed record in this respect, I will say the goaltending is getting an A+ for me. The duo of Hellebuyck and Comrie has been sensational. Hellebuyck especially. Comrie, I feel like, has done about as much as you could ask of him, but he's not really getting any support. The Jets are just not playing particularly well in front of Eric, and he's not the kind of guy who's going to put up Hellebuyck numbers. All that said, he's still hovering probably around league average in save percentage, and I feel like he's just been fine, which is good. That's all you really need of him, is to be fine, right? You don't need him to be amazing, a game-breaking presence in net. You just need him to rest Hellebuyck and be relatively competent, and I think he's done that. Hellebuyck, on the other hand, otherworldly. No other way to describe it, otherworldly. He's been at a level that, again, if last year was like the best hockey he's ever played, he's somehow bettering that this season. Truly a tremendous improvement from the past couple of seasons, which I didn't think Hellebuyck could get better because he's already won, a Vezina before. We're talking about a goalie that just, for whatever reason, somehow seems to get better with age. I love Hellebuyck, and I think I always will have a soft spot for him. He's been truly one of the absolute best things to ever happen to this team. And again, he continues to be an incredible player for the squad. Really, I just don't even know what we would do without him. Jennings Trophy recipient, Vezina winner, already on track for another Vezina. I mean, at this point, the only thing he's actually missing is a Stanley Cup ring. And I really hope that this year or sometime in the next couple of seasons is when it happens. I don't want it to be like the Lundqvist thing where he has like a legendary career and doesn't close that out, because I just feel like that's not fair, right? He deserves a ring. I think he could actually get it this year. You look at the playoff field and it feels like this is a season where it could happen, but again, if we're looking at, mid-season report cards, A plus, I mean, there's nothing to even say about it. Even the PK save percentage hasn't been as abysmal as usual. So, hey, everything's kind of looking up. I say that, and the PK has kind of nosedived the past couple of weeks, but you can't be perfect everywhere. So we gotta cut them some slack at some point, right? But if there's one thing I can confidently say that gets an A plus, it is the goaltending, man. They have been tremendous. Now, that's not the only A that I'm also going to hand out. There's another A. You had Sandberg Pionk, you had the goaltending getting an A. Who else do you think might be getting an A? And it actually is from the coaching staff, but it might not be what you would expect. We'll chat about that in just a brief moment. But before we go too much further, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That's definitely happened to me. I've had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subs, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a whopping total of $500 million in canceled subs, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. I have to say, for me, who does like a lot of online streaming, this is a great way to sort of manage all of these different feeds that I'm using. There might be some services that I was not honestly watching that much, and Rocket Money helped me to cancel them very easily. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hey, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are just chatting about our midseason report cards, and we've got just a couple more here as we are looking at, you've got the forwards, you've got the defense. I do feel like I was a little harsh in some of my grades, especially for a team that's in first place in the league, but I feel like I've tried to be balanced with how they're actually playing, right? And that's going to have to apply to the coaching staff because I feel like the coaching staff has been a little mixed in a lot of decisions. And right now, I think the goaltending and the power play have been enough to sort of paper over it. But at some point, you get to the playoffs, and sometimes these decisions do show up a little more concretely, shall I say. So, Scott O'Neill, what would I give him? I'm going to give him a B minus. A B minus just because there's a couple of things that he's done this year that I feel like have maybe not been great. He's pretty content to keep the top line together, but by the same token, I know that that's not entirely within his own control, and so that's probably why maybe I could even curve the grade up to like a B. Stuff like this, the Logan Stanley decisions, the top line decisions. And some of his responses to that, I know that he always tries to protect his players, and he's not going to throw guys under the bus or throw the front office under the bus. But I feel like sometimes it feels like his hands are a little bit tied behind his back, and so this grade sort of tries to acknowledge that not everything is within his control. But I will say that with Arniel, I do wonder about his ability to adapt and make changes. We saw it at times early in the start of the season, and then at some point it just stopped. If there were lulls in the 5v5 play, we didn't really see as many change-ups to the line combinations as I would have liked. And so for that reason, I've kind of had some hesitation to give him higher than a B. I know the record is really good and the vibes are good. And generally speaking, it seems like everyone's bought in. And there are definitely some things where I think like Kyle Connor's performance this year probably has something to do with Arniel's motivations. And I feel like Scott has generally had a good pulse on things. But because there are some decisions that for me are still holding this team at perhaps a slight disadvantage when it comes to what I would expect in the playoffs, I'm a little bit hesitant to give him higher than a B. But I mean, that's a really good B, right? A B is, 85%, 80% and above. So I wouldn't really read too much into it. I think the same can probably be said for a lot of these ratings. But if I'm going to give anyone on this coaching staff an A, it's probably got to be Davis Payne. Payne has been literally like the best find ever. A plus power play, best in the league, constantly dangerous, even without Ehlers, still fantastic. Gosh, I mean, I really feel like I couldn't say enough about how good the power play is and how important Davis Payne is to this team. Whatever his contract is, just to like extend it for a few years, because like he's been the best thing. If there's like a finder's fee that you can give another person for recommending a coaching staff member to you, whoever told Arneal about Davis really should get a nice thank you basket from the Jets, because Payne has generally been transformative for this team. Without him, I have no idea where the squad is, because it'd basically be Hellebuck, probably an average or below average power play, and that would not be first in the league. I can tell you that for a fact. On the PK side of things, Dean Chenoweth, that's a tougher one. I'm like C plus B minus. At the start of the season, the PK was aggressive and good. It's really been not good for the last month, and I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's an adjustment or a conscious decision, but it's definitely not been at the same level that it was at the start of the season. And so with Chenoweth, I'm a little more mixed, and I don't know, again, how cleanly and succinctly these lines and decisions are made along specific coaches, or if it's like joint decisions. But in that respect, if I'm just assuming that Chenoweth is responsible primarily for like defensive stuff and PK stuff, yeah, B minus C plus is kind of where I'm at. I think the PK has definitely backslid a lot, and so for that matter, it's tough for me to give him higher than that. But if it was at the start of the season, I'd feel differently. But given the last full 35 or 36 games of sample size with him, a little bit of a mixed record. But all these grades, I think, suggest that there's really, for the most part, room for improvement. And I think the Jets are actually going to improve in a lot of areas over the next couple of months. I think the forward group is going to start playing better, especially if they make a big trade acquisition. I could see some movement happening thanks to injuries. Maybe we start seeing some good line combinations that we've been waiting for. Maybe guys like Lambert and Chibrikov get bigger roles. And so I think that there's actually lots of room for growth. Sandberg's going to come back here pretty soon over the next couple of weeks. Heinola maybe carving himself out a more full-time role. So all of this stuff, I think, is going to help the Jets going forward. But if we're just taking a snapshot, what is my cumulative grade for the Jets as a whole? Ignoring the record, I want to give them like a B. I think this team plays okay at 5v5, amazing power play, bad PK, sick goaltending. And that's just kind of a weird recipe, right? I have a hard time giving above that, just because I think, the record is very flattering and sort of indicates that the Jets are definitely doing a couple of really good things. Minnesota and Toronto, that grade is going to very rapidly improve to an A, because those games, I think, are exactly what I want to see from this team. Tight, competitive hockey, good 5v5 play, great special teams, and everything follows after that. So if that's the games that we're going to get going forward, awesome. Easy to turn that grade into an A. But if what we saw from like the weeks before that is more indicative of the second half Jets, I may, be stuck in that B category for a bit. But I'd be curious to know how you rate this team. Give me your letter grades in the comments below, or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at _Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. But for today's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Next week, of course, we'll have summary of Winnipeg versus Ottawa. Cross your fingers for a win. I think the Jets pull it off. Again, give me your score predictions for that game below. But for tonight's show, that is all the time that we have. Thank you for listening. And as always, have a great night and go Jets go.